Anger Management, Season 4, Episode 7. Charlie gets Lindsay Lohan into rehab. Detailed summary. The seventh episode of Anger Management Season 4, titled Charlie Gets Lindsay Lohan into Rehab, takes Charlie Goodson into one of the most unusual situations of his professional career. As both a therapist and a man whose own life has always been filled with impulsive decisions, complicated relationships, and questionable judgment, Charlie believes he has developed the ability to handle almost any crisis. However, this episode quickly demonstrates that even Charlie's experience may not be enough when celebrity culture, addiction, public image, and personal responsibility collide. The story blends the show's typical style of sarcasm and inappropriate humor with a deeper exploration of fame, rehabilitation, and the difficulty of helping someone who may not yet be fully committed to changing. The episode begins with Charlie continuing his usual routine as an anger management therapist. His personal life remains as chaotic as ever, while his professional responsibilities continue to place him in direct contact with people struggling to control destructive behaviors. Charlie has always been attracted to complicated situations. Whether he is helping patients, becoming involved in unhealthy relationships, or creating unnecessary drama in his own life, he rarely chooses the simplest path. This tendency becomes especially important when he suddenly finds himself dealing with a celebrity who desperately needs help. Charlie has spent years working with people who struggle with emotional regulation, addiction, insecurity, and self-destructive habits. Although he frequently acts as if he has complete confidence in his abilities, his own experiences have taught him that recovery is rarely straightforward. People often recognize their problems long before they are willing to change them. Understanding that something is wrong does not automatically create the motivation necessary to fix it. The introduction of a celebrity into Charlie's world immediately changes the dynamics of the situation. Fame creates a unique environment in which ordinary problems become amplified. Every mistake becomes public, every relationship becomes a news story, and every personal failure attracts attention from strangers. The episode uses this setting to explore how celebrity status can complicate recovery. Charlie initially approaches the situation with enthusiasm. He sees an opportunity to use his therapeutic skills in a high-profile case, and his enormous ego immediately convinces him that he might be the perfect person to guide someone toward recovery. This reaction is completely consistent with Charlie's personality. He enjoys being viewed as the expert, and he often believes that his unconventional methods give him an advantage over more traditional therapists. However, Charlie quickly discovers that helping someone who lives under constant public scrutiny is very different from conducting an ordinary therapy session. Addiction itself is already a complicated issue, but celebrity culture introduces additional pressures. Public expectations, media attention, and the constant presence of people who benefit financially from a celebrity's success create an environment in which honesty becomes extremely difficult. One of the episode's most interesting themes is the relationship between public identity and private identity. Celebrities often develop public personas that only partially reflect who they really are. Over time, maintaining that public image can become exhausting. The pressure to remain entertaining, attractive, and successful can lead people to suppress emotions rather than deal with them honestly. Charlie immediately recognizes several familiar patterns. He understands that many self-destructive behaviors develop as coping mechanisms. People turn to unhealthy habits because those habits provide temporary relief from emotional pain. The problem is that temporary relief eventually creates even greater problems. Throughout the episode, Charlie attempts to use humor as a therapeutic tool. This has always been one of his preferred strategies. He believes that humor can lower defenses and encourage honesty. Unfortunately, Charlie also uses humor to avoid emotional vulnerability in his own life, which means that his jokes sometimes become obstacles rather than solutions. The therapy sessions become increasingly unpredictable. Charlie tries to establish trust while simultaneously maintaining control over a situation that seems to become more complicated every minute. His confidence begins to fade as he realizes that celebrity status changes the entire therapeutic relationship. Recovery requires honesty, but honesty is difficult when someone has spent years living in an environment built around image management. Charlie understands psychological defense mechanisms very well. He knows that denial, rationalization, and avoidance are common responses to emotional distress. However, he also realizes that fame can reinforce those defenses because celebrities often surround themselves with people who hesitate to challenge them. The episode also explores Charlie's fascination with celebrity culture. Although he tries to present himself as a detached professional, he is clearly affected by the novelty of the situation. He enjoys the excitement associated with working alongside a famous person, and this excitement occasionally interferes with his professional judgment. His patients immediately recognize this contradiction. Charlie regularly reminds them that therapists should maintain boundaries. Yet he becomes unusually enthusiastic when confronted with celebrity status. The members of his therapy group are quick to point out his hypocrisy. The therapy group continues to function as one of the show's most effective storytelling devices. The patients often act as observers who expose Charlie's weaknesses before he is willing to acknowledge them himself. They understand that Charlie enjoys attention just as much as many of the people he treats. Their discussions about addiction become some of the episode's strongest moments. Several patients describe addiction not as a failure of morality, but as a loss of control. This distinction is important because it shifts the conversation away from judgment and toward understanding. Charlie expands on this idea by explaining that addiction can take many forms. People can become dependent on substances, gambling, anger, relationships, or even approval from others. In every case, the behavior serves a psychological purpose. This observation forces Charlie to reflect on his own life. Although he is not struggling with the same issues as the person he is trying to help, he begins to recognize certain parallels. Charlie often seeks validation through romantic relationships. He enjoys being admired. He likes being the center of attention. He frequently behaves as if external approval confirms his value. The episode subtly suggests that Charlie may have his own version of addiction. His need for validation influences many of his decisions. This realization creates another layer of irony because Charlie is attempting to help someone else recognize unhealthy patterns while continuing to ignore several of his own. Jennifer also contributes an important perspective. As Charlie's former wife, she understands him better than almost anyone. She immediately notices that Charlie's involvement in the situation is becoming more personal than professional. Jennifer reminds Charlie that recovery cannot be forced. A therapist can provide guidance, but meaningful change requires personal commitment. Charlie has heard this lesson many times throughout his career, yet he continues believing that his intelligence and charm can solve almost any problem. His conversation with Jennifer highlights one of the episode's central ideas. People cannot be rescued against their will. This lesson frustrates Charlie because he enjoys solving problems. He wants to believe that the correct combination of therapy, encouragement, and persistence can overcome any obstacle. Unfortunately, addiction rarely follows a predictable pattern. The episode also examines the role of personal accountability. Rehabilitation programs provide structure, support, and professional guidance, but they cannot replace personal responsibility. The decision to change ultimately belongs to the individual. Charlie becomes increasingly invested in achieving a positive outcome, partly because he genuinely wants to help and partly because success would reinforce his image as an exceptionally talented therapist. His ego therefore becomes entangled with the therapeutic process. This is a dangerous situation because Charlie begins measuring success according to his own expectations rather than according to the needs of the person receiving treatment. His desire to achieve results sometimes prevents him from listening carefully. The therapy group once again challenges him. The patients suggest that Charlie is becoming emotionally attached to the outcome because he wants recognition. At first, Charlie rejects this criticism. He insists that his only goal is helping someone in need. However, the more he thinks about it, the more he realizes that his patients may be correct. One of the most important themes throughout anger management is that Charlie constantly learns the same lessons he teaches other people. Every professional challenge eventually becomes a personal challenge. This episode continues that tradition. Charlie begins recognizing that rehabilitation is not about controlling another person's choices. It is about creating an environment in which healthier choices become possible. The story also explores the difference between fame and fulfillment. Celebrity status often creates the illusion of success, but the episode suggests that wealth, popularity, and public recognition cannot automatically provide emotional stability. In some cases, they may actually make emotional problems more difficult to identify. Charlie understands this intellectually, but seeing it firsthand changes his perspective. He begins questioning several assumptions about happiness and success. His own life provides an interesting comparison. Charlie has achieved professional success, enjoys financial stability, and maintains an active social life. Yet he continues struggling with anger, commitment, and emotional intimacy. His experiences demonstrate that external accomplishments do not automatically eliminate internal conflicts. As the episode progresses, Charlie gradually shifts his approach. Instead of trying to control every aspect of the situation, he begins focusing on support rather than persuasion. This adjustment represents genuine growth. He learns that therapy is not about proving that he is right. It is about helping another person discover their own motivation. The humor remains consistent throughout the episode. Charlie continues making inappropriate comments, his patients continue challenging his authority, and his personal relationships continue creating complications. Yet beneath the comedy lies a surprisingly thoughtful examination of recovery. The episode refuses to present rehabilitation as a simple process. There are no magical solutions. There are no instant transformations. Instead, the story emphasizes the importance of honesty, accountability, and patience. Charlie also learns another valuable lesson about humility. He likes to think of himself as someone who can solve impossible problems. But this experience reminds him that therapists are guides rather than magicians. They can offer support, provide insight, and create opportunities for growth. They cannot force another person to change. This realization affects Charlie more deeply than he initially expects. He begins examining several aspects of his own behavior, including his tendency to seek recognition and his habit of measuring success through external validation. His patients notice the change immediately. For perhaps the first time during the episode, Charlie becomes willing to listen instead of immediately defending himself. The relationship between Charlie and his therapy group continues evolving because of moments like these. The patients no longer function as passive participants. They actively contribute to Charlie's growth. Their willingness to challenge him transforms the therapy sessions into conversations rather than lectures. This mutual learning process remains one of the strongest elements of the series. By the final portion of the episode, Charlie accepts that recovery belongs to the individual rather than the therapist. He can provide tools, encouragement, and professional guidance. He cannot make choices for someone else. This understanding allows him to let go of his need to control the outcome. The episode ends without pretending that every problem has been solved. Recovery remains an ongoing process. Personal growth remains difficult. Relationships remain complicated. Charlie remains flawed. However, he leaves the experience with a slightly better understanding of both addiction and himself. He recognizes that fame does not protect people from emotional pain. He understands that helping someone requires patience rather than ego. Most importantly, he acknowledges that change must come from within. Charlie Gets Lindsay Lohan Into Rehab successfully combines celebrity satire with the show's traditional themes of emotional growth and personal responsibility. What begins as a humorous story involving celebrity culture gradually develops into a deeper exploration of addiction, identity, and recovery. Charlie enters the situation believing that he will be the hero who fixes everything. He leaves with a much more realistic understanding of what therapy can and cannot accomplish. The episode reinforces one of the central messages of anger management. Emotional health is a continuous process rather than a destination. People do not become perfect overnight. They struggle, make mistakes, experience setbacks, and continue trying. Charlie himself represents this idea perfectly. He is simultaneously a therapist and a patient, a teacher and a student. Every episode places him in situations that expose his weaknesses while also allowing him to develop a slightly greater understanding of himself. Season 4, Episode 7 continues that pattern beautifully. Through humor, conflict, and a surprisingly thoughtful examination of celebrity rehabilitation, the episode reminds viewers that personal growth rarely follows a straight line. It requires honesty, support, and the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. Charlie may never completely overcome his own flaws, but every challenge brings him one step closer to understanding them. And in the unpredictable world of anger management, that small amount of progress is often the greatest victory anyone can achieve.